Good morning, everyone, and welcome you all to our GeoFest today. We are the Group 6, including 5 members, who is Đồng Lê Hải Bình, Phạm Hải Minh is me, Nguyễn Minh Ngọc, Lê Thị Hải Hiến, and Nguyễn Linh Chi. Today, we will continue our itinerary of exploring the UK with one of the most vibrant and beloved city, which is also well known as the financial capital of the whole world.
And yes, that's right. Our main character today is London. But don't you know that finance is not everything about its capital? More intriguingly, what piques our interest be derived from a simple yet interesting lines from a cartoon, which is, in London, everyone is different, and that means everyone can fit in. London, a thriving cosmopolitan metropolis, a city that opened around the clock. It is the world's oldest, greatest city, a cultural, economic, and political center that continues to grow every second. London is always moving, changing, and developing. And the quotes point out the truth that diversity and revolution is natural, and everyone is a part of it. Here in London, a vibrant city. And thus, with all those intriguing facts, we decided to get an insight and explore more about this city to see how it could be familiar with the above-mentioned saying. So how does London, the largest city of the Western Europe, function? Let's take a look at the city vital statistic, the significance of its locations, the landscape, weather, populations, historical and cultural life, and call it a day with some iconic symbols. So let's get straight into the first point of the London profile, in which we will discover about the significance of London locations and some main points of its topography. The United Kingdom, looking at the globe, we can see that the British Isles in the North Atlantic are geographically close to the continental Europe. And London, the capital of the United Kingdom, is located in the southeast of the Great Britain, at the estuary of the River Thames. So it's clear to see that the main topographical features of London is, of course, the Thames Rivers, which crosses the city from the east to the southwest. The Thames Rivers has many tributaries, most of which are now underground as they flow through London. Also, the Thames Rivers is also a tidal one, and which is the main reason why London is often vulnerable to flooding. So the story of London extends back to the Roman time, where it just began as just like a settlement of one of the shallow of the river crossing point. At first, it wasn't easy for the city to settle because there was so much marsh and low-lying wetland. But eventually, the city was first sited around what is now the London Bridge and became the place that attracted a lot of market traders. So perfectly located for the trading with continent, more and more goods began to arrive in London at sea, and as trading grew, London then became the thriving center of commerce. Colonialism and the expansion of the British Empire led the map being created with an Anglo and Eurocentric view of the world, and London and Greenwich Meridian at the center point with all of time zone longitude radiating from there. So the London time zone plays a really important part in driving its economic activities. So to be more specific, those who work in the London huge financial sectors can now trade with Asian, which is 5 to 7 hours ahead, Australia 8 to 10 hours ahead, and later that same day, New York, which is 5 hours behind. Regionally, London is able to trade with Europe by the seas more quickly than every other cities in Britain. Why? Simply it's because it is closer to the city from both north and west. And even when the largest city in the Midland of the North rapidly expanded during the Industrial Revolution, London still remained the larger populations, economy, and port. Weather and climate are also some significant points when we talk about London. Situated 51st degree north of the equators, London climate is temperate maritime. What I mean by the temperate maritime is the weather in which the average temperature are generally moderate. Despite some occasional cold winter, it rarely receives significant snowfall because of the heat from surrounding building, which we also know as the urban heat of the island effect. In the second part of the profile, which is the growth of a city, we will give you some information about the populations and some key historical events and stages of London. Terming population, let's have a look at the reason why people moved to London over centuries. London, as we know, has always been a diverse city that attracts people from all around the globe. The 15th and 16th century brought like Protestants seeking for religious freedom, Jews escaping from the persecutions. And since then, in London, there have been many waves of migrants, particularly in the 20th century and peaking recently in the 21st. And although Brexit could ultimately reduce the figure of the European living in London, the estimated number is still 1.6 million. Students from over 200 countries attend London School, and every major language is speaking in the city. London population now is growing faster than any time in its history. Recently, London has been the home to 8.6 million of people, which has never been before. So why did this happen? The reason lies in the increasing migrants, primarily from overseas, but also within the country. 1.9 million economic migrants living in London is from overseas, accounting in the period of 13 years from 2000 to 2015. Migrants to London consist of two groups of workers, often skilled and unskilled. Many skilled workers take up like well-paid jobs in sectors including finance, law, management, advertising, media, technology. Skilled employees are hired overseas because simply there aren't enough British workers to fill in the vacancy due to the aging population. On the other hand, many unskilled migrants do jobs that the UK workers don't want to, like the rubbish collectors, commercial cleaning, childcare, but London's construction and hospitality industry would also be struggle without these people. Many of these unskilled workers come from, let's say, Europe, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, West Africa, and so on. Not only attracting millions of people, London has also been the center of the world for centuries, with no competitors. So it's hard to imagine that around like 2,000 years ago, this iconic city was just a remote outpost town for another great superpower at that time, the Roman Empire. So the Romans founded this city around like 50 AD and called it Londinium. By the end of the 2nd century, the Roman London had the population of, let's say, 45,000 people and a 20-foot high wall around it. And like most of other Roman cities, the old London has a forum, a public bath, and an amphitheater that is similar to the Roman Colosseum, which can hold like 8,000 people at the same time. Although the modern London is significantly bigger these days, the Roman London still remains the heart of it, also known as the Square Mile, or the City of London. And although being a part of London, this city functions like a separate county, and has like dedicated the major and authority of itself. But back to Romans. When the empire declining, Rome refused to send soldiers back to London, and by the 407 AD, the city was completely abandoned. So after the next 600 years, the area was torn between the Angles, Saxons, the Jews, and also the Vikings. Time flies until the 1040s. The King Edward moved his court to the Westminster Abbey, so the London become again the royal city. But soon after that, another group of invaders, Norman, took the control of London and crowned their King William there. The King William built a castle for himself, which is now known as the Tower of London. Medieval London grew like bigger and became a lively place. It has many famous horse markets in which people hold horse races or executions. Londoners at that time enjoyed tournaments, wrestling, ice skating in the winter. But it could also be a brutal place to live in. For example, the city had suffered from numerous plague outbreaks, and the biggest events ever is the Black Death, which killed like almost 1/3 of London population at that time. But the biggest disaster that hit London was the Great Fire in 1666. Most of the buildings at that time were made of wood, and when a small fire started from a baked house, the wind rapidly spread the fires across the city. And such a pity, more than like 13,000 houses were destroyed because of the fire, and countless people died. So to prevent the same disaster, houses in London since then were built by brick and stone instead. So after the hit, London was growing bigger and even wealthier, particularly when the British Empire was becoming more powerful in the world. The pinnacle of London accelerated development was during the Queen Victoria's reign. The population multiplied 6 times as the result of dynamic industrialization, railway constructions, and the first time ever an underground metro in 1863. The first time ever. So by the 20th century, the city was much shaped by the 2 world wars, particularly during the later one. London was heavily damaged and thousands were killed by intensive bombing of the world. So today, London get revised and it becomes a vibrant, multicultural city and remained the world centers of finance, art, and fashion. And now, let's turn to the 3rd pages of the London profile with some distinctive cultural and economics activities. Turning culture, London is the host of several festivals, fairs, and carnivals throughout the year, which cost you nothing but a healthy body to immerse yourself in every of them. One of the most famous ones is the Notting Hill Carnival, which is the world's 2nd largest carnival. So this special festival often takes place over the August bank holiday weekends. It is led often by the member of the British West Indian community and attracts around 2.5 million people annually, which making it one of the world's largest street festival and also a significant event of the Black British culture. In 2006, the UK public also voted this carnival onto the list of the icons of the whole England. It has a distinctly Afro-Caribbean flavor, and the highlights lies on the competitions between the London Steel Pans Band and a 3-mile street parade with dancing and music all along the way. This special carnival was first held in 1959 in London in response to a series of racist attacks and rioting that spread from the Nottingham to the west of London, in which white people targeted the black people. So, responding to the attacks and increasing tensions on the black people, an activist called Claudia Jones and her co-workers, as the founder of the West Indian Gazette newspaper, has organized a Caribbean carnival in the St. Pancras Town Hall on the January of 1959. And the Jones Carnival was envisioned as a way of showing solidarity and strength within the growing Caribbean communities and also soothe the ongoing tensions on the black people. The history of the Notting Hill Carnival represents the resilience and also the cultural diversity in the communities of London. Despite the political pressures on Notting Hill Carnival has grown and thrived and represent a space for challenge and community cohesion, I do believe that the divine meaning of the festival will still remain, and the art is always art. Coming to the 2nd chapter, which is the economic status of London, we can clearly see that London economy is dominated by the service industry, particularly financial services and associated professional services, which have a very strong link with the economy in other parts of the whole UK and internationally. In addition to being the capital city of the United Kingdom, London is one of the world's leading financial centers for international businesses and commerce, and is also one of the command center of the global economy. London itself generates approximately 22% of the whole UK GDP. About over 800,000 private sectors of businesses were based in London at the start of 2013, more than in any other regions or the country in the UK. London shipped to a mostly service-based economy earlier than others countries in the UN, particularly following the Second World War. That's the reason why London has been so successful. Currently, over 85% of the employed populations in London works in service industry, and another 500,000 in the rest work in manufacturing, constructions, and almost like equally divided between both. And that is maybe the reason why London is dubbed as the capital city of the whole world. Saying goodbye to vibrantly colourful carnivals in Nottingham and impressive figures about the Kingdom of Finance, London, let's move to the last chapter of our profile about London, icons and symbols. There are dozens of things that's very unique to London, giving it an identity, a historical significance. I don't know if you're like me. Having seen them in movies and read about these icons, I do looking forward to see them in person. So let's take this opportunity and come with me to discover about the most iconic things in London, which is the Big Ben. The House of Parliament and Elizabeth Tower, commonly called Big Ben, are among London's most iconic landmark and must-see London attractions. Technically, Big Ben is the name given to the massive bell inside the clock tower, which weighs more than like 80 tons. The clock tower looks spectacularly at night when the 4 clock faces are illuminated, and it makes really good views and scenery of London. The story of Big Ben started when the Palace of Westminster was destroyed by a fire in 1834. 10 years later, it was decided that the new building of the House of Parliament should include a tower and also a clock. A massive bell was required, and the first attempt made by John Warner and Sons at the Stockton-in-Tees, cracking irreparably. The matter was knocked down, and the bell recast in the White Chapel in 1858. Big Ben first rang across the Westminster on the 31st of 1855. A short time later, in September 1859, Big Ben was cracked. The lighter hammer was flat, and the bell roasted to present an undamaged section to the hammer. That was the bell that we heard today. So, to Londoners and British people in general, Big Ben is not just a clock, it's the symbol of the homeland. Big Ben, hearing the gems makes me feel at home, said Jane Burton, a famous British actress. Coming to England, coming to London, Big Ben is an unforgettable thing. It carved into generations of people in London and also British and also Britain that Big Ben is unforgettable and being a part of our soul. And that is the end of our profile about London. Now let's move to the second part with some interesting artifacts with New York.
How did the Victorians make the world's largest, most ambitious clock? And have it run on time in a tower almost 100 meters tall? Inside the tower, it's master clockmaker Ian Westworth's job to keep Big Ben running to time.
We've got 334 stairs in the clock tower and no lift, unfortunately.
Inside this iconic clock tower hangs Big Ben itself, the 13-ton bell that gives the tower its nickname. The bells that chime on the quarter hour sit around it. Their strikes are controlled by the intricate ticking mechanism at the heart of the tower. It keeps the clock accurate to within just 2 seconds a week. On each side, 312 shards of opal glass make up the clock face. The copper minute hands are 14 feet long, as tall as a double-decker bus. These famous dials have kept London running on time for 160 years. This clock needs winding. When Parliament commissioned this clock in 1854, they demanded that Big Ben should be the biggest, the most powerful chiming clock in the world. And, most challenging for the age, accurate to within 2 seconds per week. But there was a problem with making such a giant clock accurate.
The clockmakers of the day said you just couldn't do it. Our minute hands are 14 feet long, so in a good gust of wind, They act as like sails, and clocks before this time, the wind would catch the hands and the hands would drive back and make the clock inaccurate.
The secret to stopping strong gusts blowing the hands out of time is a set of heavy weights that pull the hands round as they drop. Two swinging arms keep the weights dropping at the correct speed by pushing the pendulum, which sets the ticking speed of the clock. The pendulum turns a ratchet wheel once every second, which releases the weights by a precise amount so they can pull the clock hands round at exactly the right speed.
Is right at the very back. You can just see the pendulum swing left and right, and then like a
Thanks, and I am Hai Bing. Now I will be in charge to talk about history and events of London Underground. While double-decker bus are an icon to the sightseeing industry, London Underground also is the first underground over the world, which was conducted in 1863 with a purpose of reducing street congestion. These were what we call surface lines, built by digging a long stretch and laying track and covering it over again. Initially, these early underground railways used steam trains. After that, in 1998, the separate companies started to group together to promote the system as a coherent network under underground demand. Gradually, most of companies merged and network expanded as a population of London soared. And at the end, 1933, London's public transportation, such as buses, trams, trolley buses, as well as underground railways, came under public ownership, and decisions about services could be fully coordinated for the first time. And this is a short story surrounding the first underground over the world. And now I will in charge to tell some interesting events about this. And I believe you guys would be shocked when knowing them. The first special event happened in 2005. The 7 July 2005 London bombings, often referred to as 7/7, was a series of 4 coordinated suicide attacks carried out by terrorists in London that target commuters traveling on the city's public transportation during morning rush hour. And unfortunately, 52 people are killed in bomb attacks on 3 tube trains and buses. And next, in 2007, the first time reached the milestone of 1 billion passengers in Asia for the first time. This important milestone could have been achieved through the hard work and dedication of staff across the underground network. Especially in 2010, the Queen visited Aldgate station, and the first air-conditioned walk-through underground runs the Metropolitan line. And the last special event I would like to mention is Victoria in 2011. A full fleet of new brand Victorian line trains became operational, and Green Park became step-free to provide easier access to Victoria and Jubilee lines in the time for Opelix. So this short story and events about underground, and now Minh will be in charge to talk about construction and some interesting facts surrounding the first underground over the world. Thank you for listening.
Alright, so let me introduce you about the construction of the London Underground. The Underground now has 11 lines, covering 402 kilometers, and serving 270 stations, handling up to 5 million passenger journeys a day. All-night weekend services start on some lines in 2016. At peak times, there are more than 543 trains in service, with the fastest line running 40 trains an hour. Here are some interesting facts about the London Underground. First thing, the majority of the London Underground is not underground. The entire London Underground network is approximately 249 miles long. employing more than 4,100 trains and linking 270 stations, but only about 45% of those miles are underground. Second, each train travels about 114,500 miles a year. Each tube train travels an average of 114,500 miles a year, or 4.6 times around the world. The longest distance between adjacent stations is approximately 3.9 miles from Chatham to Chenfont and Latimer. 3. There are some ghosts reportedly living down there. The tube is also reportedly home to a host of ghostly apparitions, including the faceless woman of Beacon Tree Station, the toothy man of Channel C Depot, and the screaming spectre of Farringdon Station. 4. People have left a lot of weird things on the trains. Among the strangest things left on the underground and collected by the Lost Property Office, a jar of burnt cement, an Albert motor, 3 dead beds in a container, a vasectomy kit. 5. 500,000 miles called the underground home. An estimate 500,000 miles live in the tunnels, but they are not the only pests. The mosquitoes that live in the tube are of the different and somewhat more vicious species than their above-ground cousins. This is a video about London Underground. Please enjoy. Okay, so next one, Linh Chi will introduce you about the second artifacts of London.
Hải Bình and Minok have introduced you about the underground London, and now I will tell you about a famous icon of London, which is the double-decker bus. And they are used all over the world, but the most famous is the bright red buses in London. But how exactly did this bus become the tourist bucket list item it is today? Let's start our journey. The first double-decker was actually a two-level horse-drawn carriage, and it was pioneered by a man named Stanislas Bouderie. But later in 1829, inspired by his idea, an English gentleman brought the omnibus to London. And apart from vehicles, it's for sightseeing tours of the city. Area with most double buses in the world have a hood. The first double-decker was actually a two-level horse-drawn carriage, pioneered by a man named Stanislas Bouderie. But later in 1829, inspired by his idea, an English gentleman brought the omnibus to London. And apart from vehicles, it's for sightseeing tours of the city in areas with mild weather. Most double Now, I will move you to some important events of double-decker bus. to note that London's double-decker bus were taken out of service in 2005, but it is still reproduced through travel books, photos, and movies. That's what made British people remember this vehicle forever. On the day December 9, 2005, thousands of Londoners went to Stratton Station to say goodbye to Routemaster 2217, Route 159, and since then they have considered this double-decker bus become a specialty like Buckingham Palace or Big Ben Clock Tower. After that, in 2008, Boris Johnson won the election and announced that he could reopen the double-decker buses to serve the travel needs of people. It was he launched the new Routemaster bus model, which is operated by a hybrid engine that saves up to 40% of fuel. Londoners are really satisfied with the new double-decker buses because it is 11.2 meter long car, but with fewer seats, only about 62 seats. Such was its popularity, though, that the classic Routemaster was given a new London look by a designer Thomas Heatherwick, who famed for his Olympic quadrant design for 2012 London Games. Almost a century later, London crowds are still heavily reliant on the Red Fleet, with more than 2 billion passengers preferring to ride the bus across the city rather than content with the confines of the tube. The London bus continues to have a novelty factor that the tube could never quite master. Sitting on the top deck of a Routemaster will always be the best way to see the sights of London. And now, Hyun will tell you about the bus travel and some more interesting things about London bus ticket. And now, Hyun will show you to a beautiful route by London double-decker bus.
So now, let's explore the principle of operation of double-decker buses in London. London buses are card only, so you cannot buy a ticket with the cards. Use a visitor or the card, a travel card, or a contactless payment card to pay your fare. Unlike the two-your fare system, a single London bus's journey costs £1.55, no matter how far you go. You can even take multiple buses within 1 hour at no extra charge thanks to the hopper fare. No matter how many buses you take in a day, this will never cost you more than £4.65 total. Just make sure you use the same payment card for every journey. Besides, many of London bus routes run all night. Several London bus routes run 24 hours. Or look for the end in front of a bus number. This letter indicates that a bus covers the period between the close of the tube and the start of the daytime bus service. Moreover, hop on a London bus tour for perfect opportunities to appreciate the full architectural splendors of London's famous streets and monuments. Tour guide offer historical background and interesting facts with commentary available in several languages. Some regular bus routes are good for sightseeing. You can try the Route 9 for London's Museum and Palace, Route 17 for Heritage and Pub, and Route 35 for a tour of London markets. Above is some useful suggestion when you take a bus in London. And now I want to refer to several interesting facts about the double-decker buses. So why did double-decker buses flourish in London more so than the single-decker buses? Single-decker buses offer a lot of pros. They can go through the tunnel with low ceiling. They are easier for handicapped passengers and usually allow for more standing space. But in a place like London with so many narrow passages and shifting roads, the land of single-decker was sort of problematic. The arc of its turns would slow down and disrupt the traffic. Besides, tourists and seasiders enjoy the view of double-decker buses, and probably the biggest pros of the double-decker buses is more seating space. But maybe the double-decker buses isn't enough. If a bar can have a 2 floor, why not 3? Turns out the triple-decker bus bring a lot of complication with it. Its height put it in danger of passing into the trees and bridge for one. The most famous triple-decker buses, complete with a full-length third deck, is purely fictional, and that is the benign bus from the Harry Potters. Only available to wizards, the bus require one to stick out the window into the road like some sort of medical hitchers. As with the real London buses, stretching back to their earliest days, this is far from the bagging. Okay, so now let's take a look at some interesting pictures of these double-decker buses.
Have a holly jolly Christmas, it's the best time of the year. Now I don't know if there'll be snow, but
this video is quite short, but I think this is enough to deliver on the gorgeous scenery of London's and double-deckers as well. And that's all of my brief presentation. And thank you so much for listening.